Now for our roundtable with CROWLEY and Mary Anna Mancuso. Coronavirus worries forced President Donald Trump to cancel the Republican National Convention activities in Jacksonville in August. He'll give his renomination speech in an alternate form to be determined. Reaction now from our analyst.
You know, in some ways, it's not surprising that they finally had to cancel the convention in Jacksonville. Apparently, the President of the United States has finally understood that the coronavirus is a really serious issue and that he might have to cancel some of his events that have large crowds. The whole idea of moving into Jacksonville was silly when you have Florida as one of the leading states when it comes to coronavirus cases and deaths. So it was wise that they moved it out of Jacksonville.
Mariana, your take?
I would have to agree. I mean, Jacksonville was not a good plan from the start. And we've seen the cases continue to rise in the Sunshine State. And I think that it was the right thing to do. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I applaud the president for acknowledging this and deciding to cancel the convention in Jacksonville.
Both for Republicans and Democrats, tough. The party stalwarts look forward to these conventions. It means a lot to them. I knew people from here that were planning to go to Jacksonville. I knew Democrats who were planning to go to that convention as well. In terms of the traction or additional traction in a non-coronavirus world, it might have gotten them into Florida. Would it really be that big a blip on the political radar had they been able to hold it in a non-COVID world? Mariana?
I think so. Yeah, it would have been an opportunity, definitely. You know, we know that the president's support is eroding in the Sunshine State, and he has to work diligently and doubly hard than Joe Biden, so to speak, currently where polls have showing. And he's definitely going to be losing a lot of ground in the Sunshine State with him not being able to be here with all of his friends and delegates and taking the coronation of his reelection efforts.
Brian, do you share that thought?
Well, you know, obviously the ability to travel states, especially key states, you know, have your convention, have political rallies. I mean, for both parties, those kinds of things have been, you know, important almost since the founding of the country. So, you know, the virus has changed everything. Everything about society has changed. I think people in many respects are adapting pretty well. Nobody even notices anymore that most folks are doing things on Zoom for collective, you know, for big gatherings, you know, including us. And, you know, we're adjusting. And I think that, you know, we have lots of opportunities to hear from folks that we didn't have even 10 years ago.
I also sat down this week for an online interview with John Bolton, the former national security advisor to President Trump, in an event hosted by the Forum Club of the Palm Beaches. Bolton was hired, then fired, less than a year and a half into his job, and he's out with his book, The Room Where It Happened, and I moderated his appearance as I said. Bolton said he does believe the president committed impeachable offenses, a reference in part to President Trump's threat at one point to withhold military aid to Ukraine until that country promised to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. Do you believe, did you witness, do you have firsthand knowledge of, whether it's Ukraine or other instances of impeachable offenses by President Trump, according to the Constitution, you and he swore to defend?
Well, as I've said in response to that question, I think I probably would have voted in favor of conviction on Article 1, which is the Ukraine article. I thought there were other things that should have been investigated, but I think the outcome of the impeachment process constitutes what I call impeachment malpractice.
Bolton said he thought the impeachment process was a rush to judgment. Bolton also talked about President Trump's reliance on instinct rather than strategic vision, his words, when dealing with global leaders from China to North Korea to Russia and beyond. And he told one interviewer recently that Vladimir Putin played Trump like a fiddle.
So you put somebody like that on one side of the table and Donald Trump, relatively unbriefed, not much history in his education, not a clear idea of how he wants the conversation to come out. You put him on the other side of the table, and it's not a fair fight. You need, I think, to have a strategic vision. It certainly helps to have philosophical foundations, and you have to think through the pros and cons of different policies. He does not have a basic philosophy. He's not a conservative Republican. I don't mean to say he's a liberal Democrat. He's just not anything.
You know, I think it's interesting that John Bolton is now lampooning insults at the president as he's left, and he's written a book, and he's obviously trying to push book sales. But the reality is he never testified against him during the impeachment trials. And I think it's extremely rich for John Bolton to come out now and have all of these things that he has to say about the president and his misdoings while in the White House.
Brian, your take.
Well, even when he was in the Bush administration, he was always kind of the odd man out. I know one of the ambassadors to the UN that served with him. And there was always this kind of strain with John Bolton because of, his extreme conservative views on foreign policy. And that's fine. And he went into the Trump White House with those same views, and not everybody wanted to hear them. But his coming out, writing this book and refusing to testify and everything, he can proclaim himself a great patriot, but I don't think history will look at him that way.
And in fact, late in his administration, George Bush, 43, said, "I don't find Bolton credible." One writer said about the mix between President Trump and Bolton, you have somebody who wants to talk loudly and hit everybody with a stick, Bolton, and a president who's more isolationist. But in terms of the kind of traction comments get when you talk about strategic vision or allegedly lack therein for the president, does that in this election cycle and at this moment with so much else in the pipeline really have any real traction, Brian?
Well, people tend not to focus real heavily on foreign policy. I do think we have some very critical foreign policy issues that are hurting the country right now. I think that we're sort of knee-jerk when it comes to China, and it's not like the Chinese can't, credibly counteract some of the things that we're doing. Everything that Trump said he was doing with North Korea, well, that added up to nothing. A lot of things he's doing around the world, most successfully, are alienating our allies, and that's never a good thing. But sadly, and most people will focus on the economy, and in this particular election cycle, they're going to focus on what's being done about the pandemic. So I think most folks are not going to pay much attention to the worldview when it comes time to go to the election booth.
Mary Anna, you agree?
I would have to say that at this point, people are already picking their horses, so to speak, in this presidential race. And in terms of what John Bolton is doing, people are either going to agree with him or they're just going to agree with him. But the reality of the situation is I don't think it's going to sway people's opinions in the polls come November.
Speaking of polls, AP just came out. AP NORC poll talked about half of the people who are out of work wonder if they'll ever get those jobs back. And it would seem those are the kind of things when you talk pocketbook issues, economic issues, any administration, Republican or Democrat, would have tough sledding ahead with those kind of concerns being expressed by voters. Talk about, as we're coming up on 3 months till the general election, we've still got the primary that you all will be with me for to cover that. But as we look toward November, it's a tough hill to climb for any administration, Brian.
Well, the biggest part of the problem is that as the virus was hitting the country, the politicians generally tended to look at it as a problem for 2 or 3 months. And despite the fact that the experts, the medical experts, the science experts were saying that this could go on for years and that the worst of it certainly could be over the next 12 months. So there was never a policy in place to look at things over, say, even a 12-month period. And I think that's turning out to be a critical mistake as we're seeing things rise dramatically in Florida. Our unemployment system is still in trouble. Congress is still working on trying to extend benefits. We just never had a plan for the long term, and that's starting to, hurt us.
Mary Anna, polls, at least up until now or recently, suggest for all the problems, people trust President Trump more than Joe Biden, at least until recently in polling on economic matters. Talk about best case scenario of how things could turn, at least for President Trump in Florida, this huge battleground state in the next few months. What needs to happen?
Well, what needs to happen is Congress has to pass phase 4 of the coronavirus bill. We know that the unemployment benefits, that the $600 a week is coming to an end. We know that they're trying to tackle how they're going to handle eviction notices and people that are struggling to pay their rent. And I think the best case scenario is that they get it together and they're able to help the people, especially here in Florida, that are suffering from the ramifications of coronavirus, not only with their health, but also in terms of their pocketbook.
And so it behooves the administration. President Trump could take his share of credit for that, is what I hear you saying, if that comes to pass. Right now, there's a big Donnybrook about what the outlines of that next stimulus package should look like, Mary Anna.
There's no doubt that the president will take all of the accolades for this. We have no questions about that. The president will definitely take a victory lap if this works in his favor. If it does not, however, we know that he will distance himself and pivot into something else.